The Mojave Desert sun hammered down on Barstow like the fist of an angry god, turning the cracked asphalt of Route 66 into a shimmering mirage. Heat waves distorted the skeletal remains of abandoned gas stations and sun-bleached motels monuments to a time when this stretch of California highway mattered to anyone. Now it was just a place people drove through on their way to somewhere better. Harper Bennett stood in the open bay of a dying garage, her hands black with grease, up to the elbows, her blonde ponytail plastered to the back of her neck with sweat. The overhead fluorescent lights flickered and buzzed, struggling against the oppressive heat that turned the concrete floor into a griddle. She was 23 years old, 5'6", with the kind of wiry strength that came from years of wrenching on machines twice her size. Her faded Levi's were permanently stained with oil, her steel-toed boots held together by optimism and duct tape. An oversized flannel shirt sleeves rolled past her elbows, hung loose over a grease-smeared tank top. She was beautiful in the way desert wildflowers are beautiful. Tough, resilient, easy to overlook if you were not paying attention. Right now, she was not feeling beautiful. She was feeling desperate. The 1978 Chevy C10 on the lift above her head had a transmission that sounded like a bucket of rusty nails in a cement mixer. She had quoted the owner, a retired long-haul trucker named Dale, $600 for the rebuild. She had already put in 9 hours of labor and was maybe halfway done. The parts alone had cost her $450. She was going to clear maybe $50 after everything was said and done. It was not enough. It was never enough. Harper wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist, leaving a dark streak of grease across her sun-browned skin. She glanced at the pegboard on the far wall where her father's tools still hung in perfect order. Every socket, every wrench, every screwdriver in its designated place. Michael Bennett had been obsessive about organization, a place for everything and everything in its place. It was one of the 1,000 small lessons he had drilled into her before the accident took him 5 years ago. The accident. That was what everyone called it. The highway patrol, the insurance company, the funeral director, an accident. Michael Bennett, 47 years old, master mechanic and builder of custom motorcycles, had lost control of his 1995 Ford Ranger on a straight, dry stretch of highway at 2 in the afternoon. No drugs, no alcohol, no mechanical failure they could find. The truck had simply veered off the road at 70 miles an hour, rolled 4 times, and wrapped itself around a Joshua tree. Harper had been 18. Her mother, Sarah, had been 42. Neither of them had ever fully recovered. She remembered that day with a clarity that still took her breath away. She had been in the garage lying under a Honda Civic replacing a leaking oil pan gasket. Her phone had rung. She had ignored it the first time. The second time, the third time she had crawled out from under the car, annoyed her hands covered in oil. The number on the screen had been from the county hospital. "Ma'am, is this Harper Bennett?" The voice had been professional, clinical. "We need you to come to the emergency room. There has been an accident involving Michael Bennett." Harper had driven to the hospital doing 90 on surface streets, her heart hammering so hard she thought it would burst through her ribs. By the time she arrived, it was already over. Her father had died in the ambulance. Massive internal injuries. The doctor had used words like catastrophic and unsurvivable. Harper had not heard most of it. She had just stood there in the sterile waiting room, staring at the linoleum floor, trying to understand how her father could be gone. The funeral had been small, a handful of old customers, some guys from the parts store, her mother who had cried so hard she had made herself sick, and Harper, who had not cried at all. She had just stood there in her only black dress, watching them lower her father into the ground, feeling nothing, feeling everything. The metallic clatter of the bay door rolling up snapped Harper out of her thoughts. She turned, expecting Dale to be back early to check on his truck. Instead, 3 men walked into the garage, their boots echoing on the oil-stained concrete. They were all in their 30s, wearing matching gray work shirts with the logo of Barstow Premium Automotive embroidered over the breast pockets. The lead man, a stocky guy with a shaved head and a goatee, looked around the garage with the kind of smug appraisal that made Harper's jaw tighten. "Harper Bennett?" the man asked, though his tone made it clear he already knew the answer. "That is me," Harper replied, setting down the torque wrench and wiping her hands on a shop towel. "What can I do for you?" "Name is Rick Donovan," the man said, not offering his hand. "I am the head mechanic over at Premium." Heard you have been taking side work. Thought I would stop by and see what kind of operation you are running here. Harper glanced at the other two men who were poking around the garage, lifting tools off the pegboard and examining them like they were artifacts in a museum. One of them, a wiry guy with a neck tattoo, picked up a vintage snap-on ratchet and turned it over in his hands. Careful with that, Harper said sharply. It belonged to my father. The guy smirked and set it down, not gently. Relax. Just looking. Rick walked over to the Chevy on the lift, crouching down to peer up at the exposed transmission. You doing this rebuild solo? Yeah, Harper said, crossing her arms. Wow. Rick stood up, brushing imaginary dust off his hands. Because Premium is always looking for talent. We got a state-of-the-art facility, full benefits, and a steady stream of work. You could be making real money instead of scraping by in this tomb. Harper felt her pulse quicken, but she kept her voice steady. I appreciate the offer, but I am good here. Rick tilted his head, his expression shifting from friendly to condescending in a heartbeat. You sure about that? Because from where I am standing, this place is one blown inspection away from getting condemned. You got what, 2 bays, no lift on the second one, no alignment rack, no diagnostic computer. I got everything I need, Harper said coldly. Rick chuckled, shaking his head. You know what your problem is, Bennett? You think being your daddy's little grease monkey makes you a real mechanic. But out here in the real world, you are just a girl playing with tools she does not understand. The other two men laughed. Harper's hands curled into fists at her sides, her nails digging into her palms. She had heard variations of this speech her entire life. At the community college where she had studied automotive technology, she had been one of 3 women in a class of 40 men. The instructors had called on her less, graded her harder, questioned her answers more aggressively. When she had aced the ASE certification exam, scoring in the top 5% nationally, one of her instructors had pulled her aside and suggested she must have cheated. She had not. She had just studied harder than everyone else. After graduation, she had applied to 17 different shops in the Inland Empire. She had gotten 3 interviews. 2 of them had ended when the shop owner had asked if she had a boyfriend who could vouch for her mechanical knowledge. The 3rd had offered her a job as a receptionist, not a technician, a receptionist. So Harper had come back to Barstow to her father's garage and had tried to make it work. But the customers were few and far between. Most people took one look at her and drove to the next town. The ones who stayed were usually desperate or curious, and they always asked if there was a man around to double-check her work. Get out, she said quietly. Rick raised his eyebrows in mock surprise. Excuse me. You heard me. Get out of my garage. Rick took a step closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. You are going to regret that, sweetheart. This town is not big enough for both of us, and Premium always wins. Good luck finding work after we spread the word that you are incompetent. He turned on his heel and walked out, his lackeys following close behind. The bay door rattled shut, and Harper stood there in the sudden silence, her chest heaving. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw something. Instead, she turned back to the Chevy and picked up the torque wrench, her hands shaking. She thought about her father. Michael Bennett had never treated her like she was less than. He had never questioned her ability. He had never suggested she should do something easier, something more feminine. From the time she was 5 years old, he had brought her into the garage and let her hand him tools. By 7, she was changing oil. By 10, she was rebuilding carburetors. By 15, she could diagnose engine problems by sound alone. Listen, baby girl, her father used to say, pressing his ear against a valve cover. The iron is talking. It is telling you what is wrong. You just have to learn the language. Harper had learned the language. She spoke it fluently, but the world did not want to hear it from someone who looked like her. She finished torquing the transmission pan bolts and lowered the Chevy off the lift. She fired up the engine, listening to the smooth, even hum of the rebuilt transmission. Perfect. She allowed herself a small smile. This was the part of the job she loved. The moment when a broken machine came back to life. The moment when chaos became order. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw a text from her mother. Landlord came by diner. Says if we do not pay by Friday, he is starting eviction. Please tell me you have the money. Harper's stomach dropped. She opened her banking app and stared at the number on the screen. $312. The rent on the garage was $1,200 a month. They were 3 months behind. $3,600. And that was not counting the $1,500 they owed on the house or the $800 in medical bills from when Sarah had fallen and sprained her wrist last month. The medical bills were a whole other nightmare. Sarah Bennett worked as a waitress at the Main Street Diner, a job that paid minimum wage plus tips. The tips in Barstow were not good. Most days, Sarah came home with maybe $30 or $40 in her apron. She worked double shifts when she could, but at 47, her body was starting to break down. The fall had happened when she had been carrying a tray of drinks. She had slipped on a wet floor, gone down hard, and broken her wrist in 2 places. The emergency room visit alone had been $3,000. Insurance, such as it was, had covered maybe half. Harper closed the app and shoved the phone back into her pocket. She walked over to the pegboard and stared at her father's tools. When he died, he had left them almost nothing. No life insurance, no savings, just a garage full of debt and a toolbox full of memories. Michael Bennett had been a legend once. Back in the late 90s, he had run a custom motorcycle shop in San Bernardino called Ironclad Customs. He had built bikes for rock stars and movie actors and wealthy collectors who did not care what things cost as long as they were perfect. His choppers had been featured in magazines like Easy Riders and American Iron. He had won awards at bike shows in Sturgis and Daytona. People in the custom motorcycle world still talked about his builds with a kind of reverence. But then the economy had collapsed in 2008, and the custom bike market had dried up overnight. Rich people stopped buying toys. The orders stopped coming. Michael had tried to pivot to take on regular repair work, but he had been too proud to do it well. He had spent too long building art. Fixing a soccer mom's transmission was beneath him even when he was drowning in debt. Ironclad Customs had gone bankrupt in 2010. Michael had sold everything: the shop, the tools, the inventory. He had moved his family to Barstow, a town he had passed through 100 times but never stopped in, and had taken over a failing garage from a man who had died of lung cancer. He had promised Sarah and Harper that it was temporary, that he would rebuild, that they would be okay. He had been lying. Or maybe he had just been wrong. Either way, Michael Bennett had spent the last 9 years of his life fixing other people's mistakes, taking whatever work he could get, and watching his dreams die in the desert heat. Harper remembered the change in him, the way he had stopped humming while he worked, the way he had started drinking a little more, the way he had looked at her sometimes with an expression that was equal parts pride and regret, like he was sorry she had inherited his life. But he had never stopped teaching her. Even when he was exhausted, even when he was broke, even when he was drinking. He had made sure Harper knew everything he knew. Every trick, every shortcut, every hard-won lesson. "Your hands are going to be your future baby girl," he had told her once late at night, the two of them working on a 1968 Mustang that needed a full engine rebuild. "The world is going to tell you that you can't do this, that you are not strong enough or smart enough or whatever enough. But your hands do not lie. The iron does not lie. You do the work, you do it right, and nobody can take that away from you." Harper had believed him. She still believed him, but belief did not pay the rent. She heard the low rumble before she saw them. It started as a distant vibration, a rhythmic thump, thump, thump that rattled the tin roof of the garage. Harper walked to the open bay door and looked out at the street. The sound grew louder, deeper, until it was less a noise and more a physical force that pressed against her chest. Then they appeared. 30 motorcycles, all Harley-Davidsons, all ridden by men wearing black leather cuts with a winged death head patch on the back. The Hells Angels. They rolled down Main Street in a tight formation, their engines synchronized in a thunderous chorus. Chrome flashed in the desert sun. Exhaust pipes spat fire. The air itself seemed to vibrate with barely contained violence. Harper had lived in Barstow her entire life. She knew the Hells Angels. Everyone knew the Hells Angels. They were a fixture of the Mojave Desert, a living piece of outlaw mythology. They ran a clubhouse on the edge of town, kept to themselves, and occasionally made the news when one of their members got arrested for something colorful. But Harper had never had any direct interaction with them. Her father had, though. She knew that much. Michael Bennett had built bikes for the local charter back in the Ironclad days. Harper had seen photographs once years ago before her father had locked them away. Pictures of Michael standing with men in leather cuts, grinning beside custom choppers with stretched forks and ape-hanger handlebars. When Harper had asked about them, Michael had just shaken his head and said that was a different life. He had not wanted to talk about it. The convoy slowed as it approached her garage. Harper's pulse quickened. The lead bike, a massive road king with ape-hanger handlebars, pulled into the dirt lot in front of the bay. The rider killed the engine and dismounted. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and then beaten with a hammer for good measure. Gray streaked his dark hair and beard. His eyes were a cold, piercing blue. Tommy Henderson, president of the Barstow Charter. Harper knew the name. Everyone in Barstow knew the name. Tommy Henderson had been running the local Hells Angels chapter for nearly 20 years. He was a man who commanded respect through sheer presence. The kind of man who did not need to raise his voice to make people listen. The other riders parked in a semicircle behind him, their engines idling, a low growl that never quite stopped. Harper stood in the open bay, her arms at her sides, very aware of how small she suddenly felt. She counted the bikes quickly. 30. 30 Hells Angels, all staring at her garage like it was the most important place in the world. Tommy walked toward her, his boots crunching on the gravel. He stopped a few feet away and looked past her into the garage, his expression unreadable. Up close, Harper could see the details. The scars on his knuckles, the faded tattoos on his forearms. The way his leather cut was worn smooth in places from years of wind and road. "This Michael Bennett's place?" Tommy asked. His voice was deep, gravelly, like he had spent the last 40 years smoking unfiltered cigarettes and shouting over V-twin engines. "Used to be," Harper said, keeping her voice steady. "It is mine now. I am his daughter." Tommy's gaze shifted to her, and for a moment something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or surprise. He looked her up and down, not in a leering way, but in the way a man assesses a tool to see if it is up to the job. "You Harper, then," Tommy said. "Michael used to talk about you, said you were born with motor oil in your veins." Harper felt a strange tightness in her chest. Her father had talked about her to these men. She had never known that. She had never known that her father had maintained any connection to this world after ironclad customs had collapsed. "What can I do for you, Mr. Henderson?" Harper asked, trying to keep her voice professional. She was painfully aware of the grease under her fingernails, the oil stains on her jeans, the fact that she probably smelled like sweat and gasoline. Tommy turned and gestured toward the flatbed trailer being towed by one of the motorcycles. On the trailer, strapped down with heavy chains, was a 1986 Harley-Davidson FXR Wide Glide. The bike was a relic, flat black paint chipped and faded, chrome pitted with rust, the leather seat cracked like dried mud. It looked like it had been dragged out of a time capsule and left to rot in the desert sun. "That bike belonged to my father," Tommy said, his voice quieter now but no less intense. "Bill Holden, he died 20 years ago. The bike has been locked up in our clubhouse ever since. We are doing a memorial run this weekend, 50th anniversary of the charter. I want to ride his bike at the front of the pack." Harper walked over to the trailer and crouched down, examining the bike. Even from a distance, she could see the problem. The engine had that certain stillness to it, the kind of stillness that meant something deep inside was very, very wrong. She reached out and touched the engine case. The metal was cold, lifeless. There was a layer of dust and grime that suggested the bike had not been touched in years. "Has it been started in the last 20 years?" Harper asked, running her fingers along the cylinder fins, feeling for cracks or damage. "No," Tommy said. "3 mechanics have tried to get it running in the last 2 weeks. Nobody can figure it out. They all say the bottom end is seized. They want to do a full teardown. I do not have time for that. The memorial run is in 48 hours. Harper stood up and walked around the bike, her trained eye cataloging every detail. The cylinders looked clean. No scoring visible through the spark plug holes. The carburetor was a Super E, a solid piece of hardware that was nearly bulletproof. The exhaust pipes were straight drag pipes, no baffles, which meant this thing would be loud as hell when it ran. The wiring looked original cloth wrapped with that distinctive orange and black color scheme that Harley had used in the mid-'80s. She reached down and tried to rotate the rear wheel. It would not budge, not even a fraction of an inch. The drivetrain was locked solid. She tried pushing the bike forward. Nothing. It was like trying to move a boulder. A tall, heavily muscled man stepped forward from the group of bikers. He was massive, easily 6'5", with a shaved head and a scar that ran from his left eyebrow to his jawline. His leather cut had a patch that read Sergeant at Arms, Big Jim Miller. Even his name sounded like a threat. "We do not have time for this, Tommy." Jim growled, his voice like grinding stones. "We should take the bike to Riverside. There is a shop there that specializes in Evos. Guy named Martinez. He knows his way around an evolution engine." "Riverside is 200 miles, Jim," Tommy said, not taking his eyes off Harper. "And I do not trust anyone in Riverside. Besides, we do not have time to trailer it down there and wait for Martinez to fit us into his schedule." Jim looked at Harper with open disdain, his eyes traveling from her duct-tape boots to her grease-stained flannel shirt. "You are going to trust a girl." Harper's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She had learned a long time ago that arguing with men like Big Jim was a waste of breath. You had to prove them wrong with your hands, not your mouth. Words were cheap. Results were everything. Tommy pulled a thick roll of $100 bills from his vest and peeled off 50 of them. He held the stack out to Harper. The money looked obscene in the harsh desert sunlight. $5,000. More money than Harper had seen in one place in years. $5,000, Tommy said. "You get this bike running by Friday morning and the money is yours. You fail, you give me back whatever you do not spend on parts. Deal." Harper stared at the money. $5,000. It was more than she made in 3 months. It was enough to pay the rent, enough to catch up on the medical bills, enough to buy groceries and put gas in her truck, and maybe, just maybe, breathe for a little while. But it was also a Hells Angels motorcycle. A dead Hells Angels motorcycle. If she failed, she was not just losing a job. She was disappointing men who did not take disappointment well. Men who had a reputation for solving problems with violence. Men who could make her life very, very difficult if they wanted to. She looked at the bike again. The FXR was a solid platform. The Evolution engine was relatively simple compared to modern bikes. If the problem really was just a seized bottom end, she could fix it. She had rebuilt dozens of engines, hundreds if she counted all the work she had done with her father. But 48 hours was not a lot of time, and if the engine was truly seized, she would need parts. Bearings, gaskets, possibly a new crankshaft. And parts for a 1986 FXR were not exactly sitting on shelves at the local AutoZone. She looked at Tommy, then she looked at Big Jim, who was watching her with barely concealed contempt. Then she looked back at the money in Tommy's hand. "Deal," Harper said, taking the cash. Tommy nodded once, a sharp final gesture. "Jim, get the bike off the trailer." 4 bikers unstrapped the FXR and wheeled it into the garage. The bike was heavier than it looked, the frame solid and unyielding. They parked it in the center bay, and the bikers stepped back, forming a loose circle around it. The garage suddenly felt very small, very crowded. The smell of leather and exhaust and sweat filled the air. Harper walked over to her father's toolbox and opened the top drawer. Inside, beneath a layer of shop towels, was a small framed photograph. It showed 3 men standing in front of a custom panhead chopper. One of the men was a much younger Tommy Henderson, maybe in his early 30s, with darker hair and fewer scars. The man in the middle was a hulking bearded giant with a death head patch on his chest and eyes that looked like they had seen too much. Bill Holden, and the third man holding a wrench and grinning ear to ear was Michael Bennett. Harper had found the photograph a year after her father's death, hidden in the back of a drawer. She had never understood why he had kept it hidden. Now staring at the bike in her garage, she was starting to wonder if there was more to her father's past than she had ever known. She set the photograph down and grabbed a socket set. She walked over to the FXR and knelt beside it, running her hands over the engine block. The metal was cold, lifeless, but Harper had learned to listen, to feel. Machines spoke if you knew how to hear them. She grabbed a breaker bar and attached a socket to the crankshaft bolt. She leaned her full weight onto the bar, trying to turn the engine over by hand. It would not move, not even a fraction of an inch. She repositioned herself, braced her feet against the frame, and tried again, harder this time, until her arms shook and sweat broke out on her forehead. Nothing. The engine was locked solid. Big Jim snorted from somewhere behind her. "Told you, bottom end is seized. Gonna need a full rebuild. Week's worth of work minimum. Maybe 2 if you are lucky." Harper ignored him. She stood up and walked around to the right side of the bike. She leaned down and pressed her ear against the cam cover, closing her eyes. This was something her father had taught her. Listen to the iron, baby girl. It will tell you its secrets. She tapped the cover lightly with her knuckle and listened to the dull, flat echo. Then she moved to the left side and did the same thing. Different tone, slightly higher pitch. She reached down and tried to wiggle the pushrod tubes. They felt loose. Not stripped, but loose. Then she heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible rattle. Not from the cylinders, not from the crankcase, from somewhere deeper, from somewhere that should not be making any noise at all. Harper stood up and looked at Tommy. I need to pull the cam cover. You are wasting your time, Jim said, his voice dripping with condescension. The problem is in the bottom end. Probably the main bearings welded themselves to the crankshaft. Seen it 100 times on bikes that sit for decades. Harper did not look at him. She kept her eyes on Tommy. Mr. Henderson, if you want this bike running by Friday, you are going to have to trust me. And that means everyone else needs to leave. Tommy stared at her for a long moment. His expression was unreadable. Then he turned to Big Jim. Clear the garage. Nobody comes in unless I say so. Tommy, you cannot be serious, Jim protested. You are going to let some girl wrench on Bill's bike unsupervised. What if she strips a bolt? What if she cracks the case? We will never find another block for this year. I said clear the garage, Tommy repeated, his voice dropping an octave. It was not a request. It was an order. Jim looked like he wanted to argue, but he did not. He jerked his head toward the door, and the other bikers filed out. The heavy bay door rolled down with a metallic clang, sealing Harper, Tommy, and the ghost of Bill Holden inside. The sudden silence was almost overwhelming. Harper could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing. She could hear Tommy breathing. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She grabbed a set of Allen wrenches and started removing the 12 bolts that held the chrome cam cover in place. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, each bolt carefully placed into a magnetic tray. She had done this 1,000 times before, but never on a bike that mattered this much. Never with a Hell's Angel watching her every move. Tommy stood a few feet away, arms crossed and his eyes never leaving her hands. The silence stretched on. Harper felt the weight of it pressing down on her shoulders. You do not remember me, do you? Tommy said quietly. Harper paused, glancing up at him. Should I? You were 8 years old, Tommy said. Your dad brought you to the clubhouse. It was a Sunday afternoon in July, hot as hell, just like today. You sat in the corner with a stack of old shop manuals and did not say a word the whole time. Just read. Your dad said you could identify every engine ever made just by looking at the valve covers. Harper felt a strange chill run down her spine despite the desert heat. She did not remember that, but she remembered the manuals. She remembered sitting in strange garages while her father worked memorizing the architecture of machines she was too small to touch. She remembered the smell of oil and leather and cigarette smoke. She remembered feeling safe in those spaces even though she did not understand why. My dad brought me a lot of places, Harper said, returning her attention to the bolts. I do not remember all of them. He was proud of you, Tommy continued. Used to tell everyone that you were going to be better than him someday. That you had the gift, the ability to see what was wrong with the machine just by looking at it. Harper did not respond. She did not trust herself to speak. The grief was still too close to the surface even after 5 years. She removed the last bolt and carefully pried the cam cover loose. Oil thick and black oozed out and dripped onto the shop towel she had laid beneath the engine. The smell was overwhelming. Old oil that had been sitting stagnant for 2 decades breaking down into a thick, viscous sludge. Harper shined a flashlight into the cam chest and froze. There, wedged deep into the oil return passage, was a compressed wad of fine-grade steel wool. It had been shoved so far into the cavity that it was invisible from the outside. The steel wool had oxidized over the years, bonding to the aluminum like rust-welded iron. But it was there, unmistakable. Harper reached for a long magnetic pickup tool and carefully extracted the clump. It came out slowly, dripping thick black sludge. She held it up to the light, turning it in her fingers. The steel wool was compressed into a solid mass, hard as a rock. Tommy stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. What the hell is that? Steel wool, Harper said quietly, her mind racing. Someone packed it into the oil return line. Tommy's expression did not change, but Harper saw his jaw tighten. His hands, which had been relaxed at his sides, slowly clenched into fists. Why would someone do that? Because Harper said setting the steel wool down on the workbench, if this bike had started and run for more than a few miles, the oil pump would have starved. The engine would have overheated to 400 degrees and seized solid at a highway speed. She pointed the flashlight deeper into the cam chest, illuminating the teeth of the camshaft gear. Look at this. Tommy leaned in close. The leading edges of the cam teeth were not worn smooth. They were filed, deliberately ground down with what looked like a rat tail file. Someone had taken the time to carefully weaken each tooth, creating a situation where the cam would slip under load. If the oil starvation did not kill the engine, Harper continued, her voice steady but cold, the cam would have slipped at high RPM. The exhaust valve would have dropped into the cylinder while the piston was coming up. The engine would have locked instantly. At 70 miles an hour, the rear wheel would have seized. The bike would have flipped. Tommy straightened up slowly. His face was carved from stone, but his eyes were burning with something Harper could not quite identify. Rage, maybe. Or grief. Or both. This bike has been in our clubhouse for 20 years, Tommy said, his voice barely above a whisper. Locked in a secure bay. Only patched members had access. Harper pulled the magnetic tool deeper into the engine and felt it catch on something else. She pulled it out slowly, and attached to the magnet was a heavy steel hex nut. It was about an inch across, the kind used in heavy machinery. It did not belong anywhere inside a motorcycle engine. Harper turned it over in her fingers, and her breath caught. Scratched into the steel, almost invisible unless you knew to look for it, was a crude engraving. 2 dice. Snake eyes. Tommy took the nut from her hand, holding it up to the light. His face went pale. Then it went red. Then it went utterly, terrifyingly blank. Arthur Garrett, Tommy whispered. Harper looked at him. Who? My father's vice president, Tommy, said, his voice low and dangerous. They called him Snake. He stepped down the day after my father died. Said his heart was not in it anymore. Said he could not lead knowing Bill was gone. But he stayed in the club. He is my VP now. Tommy pocketed the nut and pulled out his phone. He typed out a message, his thumbs moving fast and hard against the screen. Harper could see the tension radiating off him in waves. This was not just about a broken motorcycle anymore. This was about betrayal, about murder. Tommy looked up from his phone. You just saved my life, kid. Harper felt her stomach drop. What? That trap was not meant for my father, Tommy said. Bill died in his sleep before he ever got a chance to ride this bike again. This trap has been sitting here for 20 years waiting for me. You think this Snake guy killed your father? Harper asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tommy's eyes were cold as desert night. I think he tried to, and I think your father knew about it. Harper felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. What are you talking about? Tommy walked over to the photograph on the workbench. He picked it up, staring at the image of the 3 men. His finger traced over Michael Bennett's grinning face. Your dad built this bike in 1999, Tommy said. He did all the custom work, bored the cylinders out to 95 inches, stroked the crank, hand-fitted every bearing, built a custom exhaust system. This engine was his masterpiece. He spent 6 months on it. Bill paid him $20,000, which was a fortune back then. Tommy set the photograph down and looked at Harper. In 2006, Bill Holden died of a massive heart attack in his sleep. He was 52 years old, healthy as a horse, never had any heart problems. The doctor said it was sudden cardiac arrest, natural causes. The bike was parked in the clubhouse the next day, and it has not moved since. Harper's mouth had gone dry. She did not like where this was going. But your father kept asking questions, Tommy continued. Kept saying something was not right. Kept insisting that Bill was too healthy to just drop dead like that. He wanted an autopsy. He wanted an investigation. But Bill's wife just wanted to bury her husband and move on. So that is what we did. Tommy's voice had taken on a hollow quality, like he was recounting events from a great distance. And then 5 years ago, your father died in a car accident on a straight, empty highway in the middle of the day. Harper's hands had gone numb. No, that was an accident. The police said there was no mechanical failure. They said my dad just lost control. The police said there was no mechanical failure, Tommy interrupted. But they did not look very hard, did they? Single vehicle accident. No witnesses. driver dead at the scene. They wrote it up as driver error and closed the case. Harper felt tears stinging her eyes, but she blinked them back. She would not cry in front of this man. She would not show weakness. Tommy pulled the steel nut out of his pocket and held it up. The crude snake eyes etching glinted in the fluorescent light. If your father knew about this trap, he would have left evidence. He was too smart not to. And if that evidence is anywhere, it is in this bike. Harper looked at the disassembled engine, then she looked at Tommy. What do you want me to do? Rebuild it, Tommy said. Pull the whole thing apart. Check every bolt, every gasket, every bearing, every passage. If there is proof, find it. And if I do, then Snake answers for it, Tommy said. And so does everyone who helped him. Harper took a deep breath. She thought about the rent, the eviction notice, her mother's medical bills. She thought about the money in her pocket. $5,000 that suddenly felt very heavy. And she thought about her father lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, knowing something terrible and unable to prove it. She thought about him driving down that highway, probably thinking about this bike, probably thinking about Bill Holden, probably putting pieces together that would get him killed. All right, Harper said, let's split the cases. Tommy nodded once. He pulled out his phone again and he made a call. Jim, get Dutch Vanderwall on the line. I do not care if he is sleeping. I do not care if he is in the middle of something. Get him on the phone right now. There was a pause, then Tommy spoke again. Dutch, it is Tommy Henderson. I need a complete Evo bottom end rebuild kit delivered to Barstow by sunrise. I need an Andrews EV27 camshaft. I need Torrington intercam bearings. I need a complete gasket set. I need a high-volume oil pump. I need everything. Another pause. Tommy's voice dropped even lower. I do not care what it costs. I will pay double, triple, whatever it takes. This is not a request, Dutch. This is life or death. He ended the call and looked at Harper. Dutch Vanderwall runs a performance shop in San Bernardino. He will have the parts here by morning. Harper looked at the engine, then at Tommy. I am going to need help. Splitting an Evo case is a two-person job. The cases alone weigh 60 pounds. Not on this, you do not, Tommy said. This is not just a bike anymore, Harper. This is evidence, and if Snake finds out what we are doing, he is going to come for both of us. The fewer people who know, the better. Harper's hands were shaking, but she forced them still. She looked at the engine, then she looked at Tommy, then she picked up a socket wrench and got to work. The night swallowed Barstow whole, turning the desert into a vast ocean of darkness, punctuated only by the distant glow of neon signs and the cold light of the stars. Inside the garage, the fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered, casting harsh shadows across the concrete floor. Harper worked in silence, her hands moving with mechanical precision. She had pulled the engine off the frame and placed it on a heavy steel workbench. Tommy stood nearby, smoking a cigarette, his eyes never leaving the bike. Outside, Harper could hear the low rumble of motorcycles. Big Jim and a few other members of the club had taken up positions around the garage, standing guard. Harper did not ask why. She already knew. If Snake Garrett found out they were tearing apart Bill Holden's bike, he would not sit quietly and wait to be exposed. He would act. And when outlaws acted, people bled. The engine was a beast. The Evolution Twin Mine was Harley-Davidson's attempt at building a reliable oil-tight motor after decades of leaky shovels and pans. It had been introduced in 1984 and ran until 1999 when the twin cam took over. The Evo was simple compared to modern engines, but it was still complex enough to be intimidating. Harper started by draining the oil. What came out was not really oil anymore. It was a thick black sludge that smelled like death. 20 years of sitting stagnant had turned the lubricant into something closer to tar. She caught it in a drain pan and set it aside. Next came the primary chain case. This was the aluminum housing on the left side of the engine that contained the primary drive chain clutch assembly and the connection between the engine and transmission. Harper removed the 20-some bolts that held it in place and carefully pried it free. Inside, everything looked normal at first glance. The primary chain was rusty but intact. The clutch plates were stuck together from age but not damaged. And then Harper saw it. Wedged between the primary chain and the inner case, positioned perfectly where it would get sucked into the spinning chain assembly the moment the engine turned over, was another hex nut, identical to the one she had found earlier. Same size, same weight, same crude snake eyes etching. Harper pulled it out with needle-nose pliers and held it up to the light. Tommy came over and looked at it, his expression darkening even further. Two traps, Harper said. If the cam did not kill the rider, this would have locked up the primary chain. Same result, crash at highway speed. Tommy took the nut and put it in his pocket next to the first one. How many more are there? I do not know, Harper admitted, but I am going to find out. By midnight, Harper had the engine completely disassembled. It was a massive job. Each part had to be cataloged, cleaned, inspected. The cylinder heads came off, revealing pistons that were frozen in place from rust and corrosion. The rocker boxes came off, exposing valves and springs. The oil pump came apart, revealing passages clogged with sludge. And then came the moment of truth, splitting the cases. The crankcase of a Harley Evolution engine is made from two cast aluminum halves that bolt together around the crankshaft. Separating them requires removing every bolt, breaking the gasket seal, and then carefully prying the cases apart without damaging the mating surfaces. Harper removed the 24 case bolts, placing each one in a labeled container so she would know where it went during reassembly. Then she grabbed a rubber mallet and a wooden wedge. This is the scary part, Harper said, positioning the wedge at the seam between the case halves. If I crack the aluminum, this engine is junk. Tommy said nothing. He just watched. Harper tapped the wedge gently with the mallet. Once, twice, 3 times. Nothing happened. She repositioned the wedge and tried again. On the 5th tap, there was a soft crack as the gasket seal broke. The cases shifted slightly, separating by maybe 1/8 of an inch. Harper worked her way around the case, tapping the wedge in the different spots, slowly working the halves apart. It took 20 minutes of careful, patient work. But finally, the right side case lifted free, revealing the heart of the engine. The crankshaft lay exposed, a massive forged steel assembly that looked like something out of an industrial machine. The flywheels were enormous, weighing probably 30 pounds each. The connecting rods attached to the pistons gleamed dully in the fluorescent light. Harper shined her flashlight into every corner of the left case, searching for more sabotage. And then she found it. Tucked into the scavenge port of the oil pump, wrapped in a thin layer of heat-resistant plastic, was a small black notebook. It was barely bigger than a deck of cards, the leather cover stained and warped from years of sitting in oil and heat. Harper pulled it out carefully, her heart pounding. She set it on the bench and peeled back the plastic. The notebook was dry, inside the pages yellowed but intact. On the first page, in her father's unmistakable handwriting, were 4 words that made Harper's blood run cold. If you are reading this, Snake killed me. Harper's breath caught in her throat. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped the notebook. Tommy stepped closer, his cigarette, forgotten ash falling onto the floor. Open it, Tommy said quietly. Harper turned the page. The notebook was filled with her father's meticulous notes, dated entries, spanning from March 2006 to September 2019. The entries were short, clinical, but the picture they painted was absolutely damning. March 15, 2006. Bill called me to the clubhouse. Said he needed to talk. Looked worried. Said Snake had been acting strange for months. Secretive. Taking calls he would not explain. Disappearing for hours at a time without telling anyone where he was going. April 3, 2006. Bill confronted Snake about missing money, $50,000 unaccounted for from the club's business account. Snake claimed it was a bad investment in a bar down in Victorville that had gone under. Bill did not believe him. Said the numbers did not add up. Said Snake was lying. April 9, 2006. Bill told me he thinks Snake is working with the feds. Said he found a burner phone in Snake's saddlebag when he was looking for a lighter. Called one of the numbers. Man answered and said he was Agent Brooks, DEA. Bill is going to call a vote to strip Snake's patch. April 12, 2006. Bill is dead. Heart attack. Doctors say it was natural. Sudden cardiac arrest. I do not believe it. Bill was 52, healthy, strong, worked out every day. This does not add up. Something is wrong, I can feel it. April 15, 2006. I pulled Bill's bike into my shop. Told Tommy I wanted to do a memorial rebuild. Really, I wanted to check it. Took me 3 days to find it. Steel wool in the oil return. Cam teeth filed down. Hex nuts in the primary case. It was meant to kill Bill on the road, but he died before he could ride it. This was not a heart attack. This was murder. Snake poisoned him. April 20th, 2006. I confronted Snake at the clubhouse, showed him the steel wool, told him I knew what he did. He denied everything, laughed in my face, said I was paranoid, said Bill's death made me crazy, said I had no proof. He is right. I do not yet. The entries continued year after year. Michael Bennett had spent 13 years gathering evidence, photographing documents, recording conversations, following Snake, building a case that he knew he would probably never get to present in court. Harper's vision was blurring. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving a smear of grease across her face. She kept reading. June 3rd, 2007. Found out Snake has a gambling problem. Owes money to some bad people in Las Vegas. That explains the missing $50,000. He was stealing from the club to pay off gambling debts. November 12, 2008. Snake is still taking calls from Agent Brooks. I followed him to a meeting. Victorville, parking lot behind a closed-down strip mall. They talked for 20 minutes. I could not hear what they were saying, but I got photographs. Snake is definitely an informant. He is feeding information to the DEA about club operations. March 8th, 2010. Ironclad is going under. I am broke. I need to let this go. I need to focus on keeping my family fed. But I cannot let Bill's death go unpunished. I am going to keep digging. I am going to find proof. February 19th, 2013. Snake was promoted to VP. Tommy does not know what he is. Does not know that Snake killed his father. I tried to tell him once. He thought I was still grieving, still angry. He did not believe me. I need hard evidence. I need the recording. And then finally the last few entries from 2019. September 10th, 2019. I have it. I finally have it. I recorded Snake meeting with Agent Brooks. Parking lot in Victorville. Same place they have been meeting for 13 years. Snake sold the club out. Took $50,000 to feed intel to the feds about gun sales, drug distribution. Everything. Bill found out in April 2006. Snake panicked. Poisoned him with digoxin. Made it look like a heart attack. I have the recording. I am taking it to Tommy tomorrow. This ends. Bill gets justice. Snake goes to prison. September 11th, 2019. Someone ran me off the road this morning. 6 a.m., Highway 58 near the Kramer Junction. Black SUV, no plates, came out of nowhere. Forced me into the shoulder. I overcorrected. Truck rolled. I am writing this from the hospital. Broken ribs. Concussion. But I am alive. It was Snake. I know it was Snake. He knows I have the recording. He is trying to kill me. I need to hide the evidence. I am going to put it in Bill's bike. Nobody touches that bike. It is like a shrine. If I do not make it, the evidence will be there. Harper, if you were reading this, you need to know. The recording is in the primary cover, soldered inside. Small USB drive. Password is your birthday. 517-1995. Show Tommy. He will know what to do. I love you, baby girl. I am so sorry I could not protect you. I am so sorry I brought this into our lives. That was the last entry. Harper's hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped the notebook. The tears were flowing freely now, hot and bitter and unstoppable. Her father had not died in an accident. He had been murdered, run off the road by a man he had been investigating for 13 years, and she had never known. She had spent 5 years believing it was just bad luck, just another tragedy, just the universe being cruel. Tommy reached out and gently took the notebook from her hands. He read the final entries himself, his jaw clenching tighter with each word. When he finished, he set the notebook down and looked at Harper. He knew Tommy said, his voice hoarse and broken. Michael knew everything and I did not listen. He tried to tell me once, maybe 3 years before he died. Came to the clubhouse. Said he needed to talk to me about my father. About Snake. I thought he was drunk. Thought he was still grieving. I told him to go home and sleep it off. I did not take him seriously. Tommy's voice cracked. He turned away, facing the wall, his shoulders shaking. Harper realized with a shock that this hard, dangerous man was crying. I let my father's killer stand beside me for 20 years, Tommy whispered. I made him my VP. I trusted him with club business. I trusted him with my life. And the whole time Michael was out there trying to warn me, trying to get me to see the truth. And I ignored him. Harper could not speak. She just stood there staring at the disassembled engine, at her father's notebook, at the evidence of a murder that had taken 13 years to come to light. Tommy wiped his eyes and turned back to face her. "We need to get that USB drive," he said, his voice steady again. Cold. Controlled. Harper nodded. She walked over to the bike frame and knelt beside where she had removed the primary cover. It was a heavy cast aluminum housing, now sitting on the workbench. The interior was coated in thick black oil. Harper grabbed a shop towel and started wiping down the inside of the cover, cleaning away the grime. She shined her flashlight along every surface, searching. And then she saw it. A tiny rectangular shape, no bigger than a thumbnail, soldered to the inside of the cover near the inspection port. It was a micro USB drive, the kind that was popular in the late 2000s. Someone had carefully soldered it in place, then covered it with a thin layer of black RTV silicone to make it blend in with the case. Harper grabbed a pair of needle-nose pliers and a small, flathead screwdriver. She carefully chipped away the silicone, then pried at the solder joints. The USB drive had been there for 5 years, baked by engine heat that had never come, preserved by oil that had never circulated. The solder was brittle. It cracked and gave way under pressure. Harper held the drive up to the light, her pulse racing. This tiny piece of plastic and silicone contained the proof, the evidence that could bring down a murderer. "Got it," Harper said. Tommy took the drive and slipped it into his vest pocket. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. "Jim," Tommy said, "lock down the clubhouse. Full lockdown protocol. Nobody gets in, nobody gets out. I do not care if it is a member. I do not care if it is someone's old lady. Nobody moves until I say so." There was a pause. Tommy listened to whatever Jim was saying on the other end. "I do not care what Snake wants," Tommy snapped. "Tell him the lockdown is for security. Tell him we got a tip about a DEA raid. Tell him whatever you need to tell him, but do not let him leave. And do not let him near his bike or his phone. You understand me. If he tries to leave, break his legs. But do not kill him. I want him breathing when I get there." Tommy ended the call. Then he made another one. "Dutch, it is Tommy again. Slight change of plans. I need you to deliver those parts to the clubhouse instead of the garage. Yeah, I know it is a pain. I will pay you an extra 1,000 for the inconvenience. Just get them there by sunrise." "Thanks." He looked at Harper. "We need to finish this bike, and we need to do it at the clubhouse. If we stay here, we are sitting ducks. Snake has friends, people who might come looking if he gets spooked." Harper looked at the scattered engine parts. It was 2 a.m. She had been working for 8 hours straight. Her back ached, her hands were cramping. She was running on adrenaline and coffee and pure stubbornness. "How long to pack everything up?" Tommy asked. 20 minutes, Harper said. "Maybe 30. I need to organize the parts, label everything. If I lose track of what goes where, we are screwed." "Do it," Tommy ordered. "I will get Jim to bring a truck around." Harper got to work. She grabbed cardboard boxes from the storage room and started carefully packing engine components. Each part was wrapped in shop towels to prevent damage during transport. She labeled every box with a marker: crankshaft, pistons, cam chest, oil pump. Everything had to stay organized or the rebuild would turn into a nightmare. While she worked, Tommy stood at the bay door, smoking cigarette after cigarette, his phone pressed to his ear. He was coordinating with his club, making sure everyone was in position, making sure Snake was contained. Harper thought about her father, about the 13 years he had spent chasing the truth, about the loneliness of knowing something terrible and having nobody believe you, about the fear he must have felt in those final moments, the black SUV forcing him off the road, knowing exactly who was behind it and knowing he was not going to survive. She thought about her mother waiting tables at the diner, unaware that her husband had been murdered, unaware that the kind, helpful VP who had attended the funeral was the man who had caused it. Harper felt a cold rage settling into her bones. It was not the hot, explosive anger she had felt when Rick Donovan had insulted on her. It was something colder, harder, more dangerous. It was the kind of anger that did not go away, the kind that turned into purpose. She was going to finish this bike. She was going to rebuild the engine her father had created, and she was going to make sure Snake Garrett answered for everything he had done. By 3 a.m., everything was packed. Big Jim had backed a pickup truck up to the bay door. Harper and Tommy loaded the boxes carefully, making sure nothing shifted or moved. The partially disassembled motorcycle frame went in last, strapped down with heavy ratchet straps. Tommy looked at Harper. "You ride with me. Jim will follow with the truck." Harper climbed into the passenger seat of Tommy's truck. The interior smelled like leather and cigarettes. The dashboard was covered in road dust. There was a shotgun in a rack behind the seats and a Glock in the center console. This was not a man who took chances. They drove through the dark streets of Barstow, the town silent and sleeping. Harper watched the familiar landmarks slide past. The diner where her mother worked, the high school she had graduated from, the cemetery where her father was buried. The clubhouse was on the eastern edge of town, tucked behind a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. It was a low concrete building that looked more like a bunker than a social club. Security cameras covered every angle. Heavy steel doors were reinforced with plates. This was a fortress designed to withstand raids and sieges. As they pulled up, the gates rolled open automatically. Harper counted at least 20 motorcycles parked in neat rows. Men in leather cuts stood at intervals around the perimeter, watching, waiting. Tommy parked near the main entrance. Jim pulled the truck in beside him. The gates closed behind them with a heavy metallic clang. Harper suddenly felt very trapped. Tommy led her inside. The clubhouse interior was exactly what she expected. Pool tables, a bar, leather couches, Harley-Davidson memorabilia covering every wall, photographs of past members, patches from other charters. The air smelled like beer and smoke and old leather. But there was a tension in the air that had nothing to do with the decor. The men gathered in the main room were silent, watchful. They all looked at Harper when she walked in, their expressions ranging from curiosity to hostility. Tommy ignored them all. He led Harper through a side door and down a hallway. They stopped at a heavy steel door with a deadbolt. Tommy unlocked it and ushered her inside. It was a workshop, a fully equipped motorcycle garage built right into the clubhouse. Lifts, toolboxes, welding equipment, air compressors, everything a mechanic could need. And in the center of the room, covered with a tarp, was what Harper assumed was Bill Holden's original workbench. Tommy pulled the tarp off, revealing a pristine steel workbench with a pegboard behind it. Every tool was in perfect order. It looked like a shrine, like nobody had touched it in 20 years. "My father built bikes here," Tommy said quietly. "This was his space. After he died, we locked it up. Nobody comes in here. Nobody touches his tools." He looked at Harper. "Until now. You are going to rebuild his bike in his workshop. Using his tools, it is what he would have wanted." Harper felt the weight of that statement settle on her shoulders. She was not just fixing an engine anymore. She was completing her father's work. She was honoring two dead men who had both been destroyed by the same betrayal. Jim and two other members brought in the boxes of engine parts and the bike frame. They set everything down carefully and then left without a word. The door closed behind them, and Harper was alone with Tommy and the ghost of Bill Holden. "Let's get to work," Harper said. They worked through the rest of the night in near silence. Harper cleaned every part with solvent and compressed air, inspecting for damage. The pistons were salvageable. The cylinder walls just needed a light hone. The valves needed lapping but were otherwise fine. The crankshaft was the biggest concern. It had been sitting in a bath of contaminated oil for 20 years. Harper measured the runout with a dial indicator, checking to make sure the shaft was still true. It was. Whoever had built this engine originally had done exceptional work. Harper realized with the start that it had probably been her father. Michael Bennett had built this bomb that was supposed to kill Bill Holden, never knowing it had been turned into a trap. At 5 a.m., Dutch Vanderwall arrived with the parts. He was exactly as Harper had imagined. Thin, weathered, covered in grease and tattoos. He looked like he had been born in a motorcycle shop and never left. Dutch took one look at Harper and raised an eyebrow. "Tommy, you got a girl doing the rebuild." "She is Michael Bennett's daughter," Tommy said flatly. "And she is better than you." Dutch looked at Harper more carefully. "Michael Bennett, Ironclad Customs. I remember him. Built some of the finest bikes I ever saw. You his kid." "Yeah," Harper said. Dutch nodded slowly. "Then I reckon you will do just fine. Your old man had magic in his hands. Let's see if you got it too." He set down the boxes of parts and started unpacking them. New Andrews EV27 camshaft. Torrington inner cam bearing is precision ground and perfectly round. Complete gasket set. High volume oil pump. Every part was top quality. Dutch had not cut any corners. "You need anything else, you call me," Dutch said to Tommy. "And Tommy, whatever is going on here, whatever you are dealing with, you watch your back. I heard rumors. Things are not right in your house." "I know," Tommy said grimly. "I am handling it." Dutch left and Harper got back to work. With fresh parts and clean components, the rebuild went faster. She installed the new bearings into the cases using a bearing press. She carefully assembled the crankshaft and connecting rods. She torqued everything to spec checking and double checking every measurement. By 8 a.m., the cases were back together. By 10 a.m., the engine was back in the frame. By noon, Harper was installing the cylinder heads and setting the valve clearances. Tommy had been in and out all morning coordinating with his club, keeping Snake contained. Every time he came back into the workshop, he looked more tired, more worn. The weight of what he had learned was crushing him. At 1 p.m., Harper was ready for the final step. She installed the new camshaft, carefully lining up the timing marks. One tooth off and the engine would destroy itself. She checked the alignment 3 times before she was satisfied. Then she bolted the cam cover back in place with fresh gaskets and sealant. She reconnected all the oil lines, all the fuel lines, all the electrical connections, every wire, every hose, every bolt. She filled the oil tank with fresh, synthetic 20W50. She primed the carburetor. She set the ignition timing to 35 degrees before top dead center. And then she stepped back and looked at the bike. It was finished, ready to run, ready to live again after 20 years of sitting dead. Tommy walked into the workshop and stood beside her. They both stared at the motorcycle in silence. "We need to test it," Tommy said finally, "but not here. If this thing fires up and roars to life, Snake is going to hear it. He is going to know something is wrong." Harper nodded. "Where?" "There is an old airstrip about 10 miles outside of town," Tommy said. "Abandoned since the 90s. We can take the bike out there, run it through the gears, make sure it holds together." "Let me set the timing one more time," Harper said. "I want to be absolutely sure." She grabbed a timing light and connected it to the spark plug wire. She turned the engine over by hand, watching the timing marks on the flywheel. The marks lined up perfectly at 35 degrees before top dead center. Everything was right. Everything was ready. "Give me an hour," Harper said. "I want to go through everything one more time. Check every connection, every bolt. I do not want any surprises." Tommy nodded. "I will get Jim to prep a trailer. We leave at 3. Harper spent the next hour going over the bike with obsessive attention to detail. She checked every bolt with a torque wrench. She inspected every wire connection. She made sure the carb was properly adjusted and the choke was working. She checked the clutch adjustment. She verified the transmission shifted smoothly. She examined every inch of the fuel system for leaks. By 3 p.m., she was satisfied. The bike was perfect as human hands could make it. Tommy, Big Jim, and 4 other members of the club loaded the FXR onto a flatbed trailer. Harper climbed into the passenger seat of Tommy's truck, and they rolled out of the clubhouse, heading west into the empty desert. The old airstrip was exactly what Tommy had described. A cracked ribbon of asphalt stretching across the sand, abandoned hangars rusting in the sun, tumbleweeds piled against chain-link fences. The wind howled across the open space, carrying with it the smell of creosote and dust. They unloaded the bike and wheeled it to the center of the runway. Harper checked the oil level one last time, then straddled the machine. It felt strange sitting on it. The handlebars were higher than she was used to, the seat cracked and uncomfortable. But the weight of the bike beneath her was solid, reassuring. Tommy handed her a helmet. "You do not have to do this, Harper. I can ride it." Harper shook her head. "I built it. I tested." She turned the ignition key. The fuel pump hummed softly, pressurizing the system. She pulled in the clutch and thumbed the starter button. The electric starter engaged with a whine, spinning the massive Evo engine. Once, twice, 3 times. And then it caught. The engine roared to life with a sound like tearing metal, a deep, aggressive bark that echoed off the abandoned hangars. Harper felt the vibration travel up through the frame, through the handlebars, through her entire body. It was not just a sound. It was a physical presence, a living thing. The bike was alive. After 20 years of death, it was breathing again. Harper blipped the throttle. The engine responded instantly, RPMs climbing and falling with perfect precision. No hesitation, no stumbling, no smoke, just raw, brutal power channeled through perfectly machined components. Tommy was grinning the first real smile Harper had seen on his face. That is Bill's bike. That is exactly how it sounded 30 years ago. That sound, that feeling, that is my father right there. Harper let the clutch out slowly and eased the bike forward. The rear tire bit into the cracked asphalt, and the FXR rolled smoothly across the runway. She shifted into second gear, then third. The engine pulled hard, the torque curved flat and relentless. The new cam gave the bike an aggressive, loping, idle, and vicious acceleration. By the time she hit fourth gear, she was doing 70 miles an hour, the wind tearing at her clothes, the desert blurring into a smear of tan and gray. The bike tracked straight, no wobbles, no vibrations. It felt solid, planted, like it was carved from a single piece of iron. Harper rolled off the throttle and pulled in the clutch, letting the bike coast to a stop at the far end of the runway. Her heart was pounding, her hands were numb from the vibration, and she was grinning like an idiot. She rode back to where Tommy and the others were waiting. They were all staring at her with expressions that ranged from impressed to shocked. Big Jim, who had openly mocked her abilities, was silent. His face was carefully neutral, but Harper could see the grudging respect in his eyes. Tommy walked over. Harper killed the engine and pulled off the helmet. "How does it feel?" Tommy asked. "Perfect," Harper said. "It feels absolutely perfect." Tommy nodded slowly, his eyes shining with emotion. "Then we ride it tomorrow, front of the pack, and tonight we deal with Snake." They loaded the bike back onto the trailer and headed back toward Barstow. Harper stared out the window, watching the desert roll past. She felt strange, like she was living in a dream, like none of this could possibly be real. But it was real. The bike was running, the evidence was found, and Arthur Snake Garrett was about to face justice for crimes committed 20 years ago. As they pulled back into the clubhouse compound, Harper saw that more bikes had arrived. The lot was packed now, easily 50 motorcycles. Members from other charters had ridden in. Word was spreading. Something big was happening. Tommy parked the truck and looked at Harper. "You ready?" Harper thought about her father, about the notebook, about the 13 years of investigation that had cost him his life, about Bill Holden poisoned in his sleep by a man he trusted, about Tommy, who had lived with his father's killer for 2 decades without knowing. "Yeah," Harper said, "I am ready." Tommy led her into the clubhouse. The main room was packed now. Over 50 men wearing Hells Angels cuts filled the space, their conversations dying as Tommy entered. The tension was so thick Harper could barely breathe. At the far end of the room, sitting in a heavy wooden chair with his hands zip-tied to the arms, was Arthur Snake Garrett. He was a lean man in his late 60s, his face leathery and deeply lined from decades of sun and smoke. He still wore his cut, the death head patch prominent on his back, but his eyes were wary, calculating. He knew something was wrong. Tommy walked to the front of the room and raised his hand. The noise died instantly. Every eye was on him. "Brothers," Tommy said, his voice carrying across the hall, "we are gathered here today to judge one of our own. Arthur Snake Garrett stands accused of treason, of murder, of betraying everything this club stands for." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Snake's expression did not change, but Harper saw his hands clench into fists. 20 years ago, Tommy continued, "My father, Bill. Holden died of what the doctors called a heart attack. We buried him, we mourned him, and we moved on. But Bill did not die of natural causes. He was murdered, poisoned. And the man who poisoned him is sitting in that chair." The murmur grew louder, angry, disbelieving. Several men stood up, their chairs scraping against the floor. Tommy held up his hand for silence. 5 years ago, Michael Bennett died in what was called a car accident. Single vehicle, driver error. But it was not an accident. Michael was run off the road, murdered, because he knew the truth about Bill's death. And the man who killed him is sitting in that chair. Tommy gestured to Harper. "This is Harper Bennett. Some of you knew her father. Michael built bikes for this club back in the 90s. He was family. He was killed trying to bring a traitor to justice. Harper found the evidence her father left behind. Evidence that proves everything." Harper stepped forward, her legs shaking. She pulled the notebook from her jacket and held it up. "My father spent 13 years investigating Bill Holden's death. He documented everything. He found proof that Snake was working as an informant for the DEA, that Snake had gambling debts and was stealing from the club, that Bill found out and was going to strip Snake's patch, and that Snake poisoned Bill with digoxin to make it look like a heart attack. She handed the notebook to Tommy, who passed it to a grizzled old biker with a white beard. The man opened it and started reading, his face darkening with each page. Tommy held up the USB drive, and this is a recording of Snake meeting with DEA agent Brooks, selling out this club for money, naming names, providing dates, giving the feds a roadmap to destroy us. He plugged the drive into a laptop connected to a set of speakers. The room fell absolutely silent. The recording played. 5 minutes of damning audio, Snake's voice clear and unmistakable, discussing club business with a federal agent, talking about gun sales, drug distribution, locations of stash houses, names of members. When the recording ended, the silence was deafening. And then all at once, the room erupted. Men shouting, fists slamming on tables, chairs being thrown. The rage was palpable, a living thing that filled the room like smoke. Tommy raised his hand again. It took several minutes for the noise to subside. When it finally did, Tommy's voice was ice cold. Snake Garrett, you stand accused of the following crimes: treason against the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, working as a paid informant for the Drug Enforcement Administration, embezzling club funds to pay gambling debts, murdering Bill Holden via digoxin poisoning, sabotaging Bill Holden's motorcycle with intent to kill, murdering Michael Bennett by forcing his vehicle off the road. How do you plead? Snake looked at Tommy, then at the assembled club members, then back at Tommy. His expression was unreadable. I did what I had to do, Snake said quietly. His voice was steady, calm, like he was discussing the weather. Bill was going to destroy this club. He was making deals with the cartels. He was going to turn us into drug mules. I saved us. I saved you. Liar, someone shouted from the back of the room. Snake ignored the interruption. I took money from the DEA, yes, but I fed them garbage, old information, stuff that could not hurt us. I used them, I played them, and I kept this club out of federal prison. And my father Tommy asked, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage, did you save him? Bill was sick, Snake said. He was paranoid. He was seeing conspiracies everywhere. The stress was killing him. I did him a favor, made it quick, made it painless. You poisoned him in his sleep, Tommy said. He trusted you. He called you brother. And you murdered him. Snake shrugged. And Michael Bennett. Collateral damage, Snake said. He would not let it go, kept digging, kept investigating. He was going to expose me, so I dealt with it. The room erupted again. This time, Tommy did not try to stop it. He just stood there staring at Snake, his face a mask of fury and grief. Finally, Tommy raised his hand one more time. The vote, he said, strip his patch and exile him. Turn him over to the feds, or handle it the old way. The room fell silent again. Every man knew what the old way meant. All in favor of exile, Tommy said. Not a single hand went up. All in favor of turning him over to the feds. One hand went up, then another. Maybe 5 total. They were quickly lowered when the men around them glared. All in favor of the old way. Every hand in the room went up. 50 men, one voice, guilty. Tommy looked at Snake. You have anything to say? Snake laughed. It was a hollow, broken sound. Yeah, I regret getting caught, but I do not regret what I did. Bill was weak. Michael was a liability. And you, Tommy, you are so desperate to honor your father's memory that you are blind to reality. This club would have died without me. I kept it alive. You should be thanking me. Tommy walked forward until he was standing directly in front of Snake. Then in a motion so fast Harper almost missed it, Tommy drove his fist into Snake's face. The sound of breaking bone echoed in the silent room. Snake's head snapped back, blood spraying from his nose. Tommy leaned down, his face inches from Snake's. My father was 10 times the man you will ever be, and you will die knowing that everyone in this room despises you. He straightened up and looked at Big Jim. Take him. 2 enforcers stepped forward and cut Snake's zip ties. They hauled him to his feet and dragged him toward the back door. Snake did not fight. He just looked at Harper one last time as they pulled him past. Your father was a fool, Snake hissed through broken teeth and blood. He should have minded his own business. Harper stepped forward, her voice cold and clear. My father was a better man than you could ever dream of being. And now everyone knows exactly what you are. Snake said nothing. They dragged him out into the desert sun, and Harper never saw him again. The clubhouse slowly emptied as members filed out, heading into the desert to witness what came next. Harper stayed inside. She did not need to see it. She did not want to see it. Tommy came back an hour later. His hands were clean. His face was calm. Whatever had happened out there in the desert was finished. It is done, Tommy said quietly. Snake Garrett is dead, buried in an unmarked grave where nobody will ever find him. Bill can rest now. Your father can rest now. Harper nodded. She felt numb, empty. 5 years of grief and confusion had been replaced with cold, hard truth. And somehow that was worse. The memorial run is tomorrow at noon, Tommy said. 200 bikes, members from 5 different charters. We are going to ride in memory of Bill Holden and Michael Bennett, and you are riding with us. Front of the pack, on Bill's bike. Harper looked at him. Me. You earned it, Tommy said. You rebuilt the bike. You found the truth. You finished what your father started. Michael would be proud of you. Bill would be proud of you. Hell, I am proud of you. Harper felt tears stinging her eyes again. She wiped them away with the back of her hand. Thank you, she whispered. Tommy reached into his vest and pulled out a leather patch. It was different from the others. Instead of the death head, it bore a single word in embroidered letters. Legacy. Your father was family, Tommy said. That makes you family. This patch means you are under our protection. Forever. You wear this and nobody in the world will touch you. You are a Bennett. The Bennetts built this club as much as the Holdens did. Harper took the patch with shaking hands. She stared at it, feeling the weight of what it meant. This was not just a piece of leather. This was an adoption, a recognition, a declaration that she belonged. Tommy helped her pin it to her jacket. Then he stepped back and nodded. Welcome to the family, Harper. The 50th anniversary memorial run began at noon the next day. 200 motorcycles lined Main Street, their engines idling in perfect synchronization. The sound was a physical force, a deep rhythmic thunder that shook windows and rattled bones. Harper stood beside the 1986 FXR, her hands resting on the handlebars. She was wearing a borrowed leather jacket with the legacy patch prominently displayed. Her hair was tied back in a tight braid. Her boots were still held together with duct tape, but somehow that seemed appropriate now. She was a mechanic, she was her father's daughter, and she was about to lead 200 Hells Angels through the Mojave Desert. Tommy stood beside her, his own bike idling nearby. You ready? Harper nodded. She threw her leg over the FXR and settled into the seat. The engine rumbled beneath her, that familiar aggressive lope of the Andrews cam. She could feel her father in the machine. His hands, his knowledge, his love. She could feel Bill Holden too, the man who had been murdered for trying to protect his club. Tommy mounted his bike and raised his hand. The signal. 200 engines revved in unison, a deafening roar that echoed off the mountains. And then they rolled forward, a massive column of iron and leather and defiance. Harper rode at the front of the pack beside Tommy, the desert blurring past in a haze of speed and sound. The bike ran perfectly. No vibrations, no hesitation, just pure, relentless power. She twisted the throttle and felt the bike surge forward, the wind tearing at her clothes, the sun beating down on her helmet. She felt free. She felt powerful. She felt like she was flying. They rode for 2 hours through the empty desert, past abandoned towns and salt flats, and Joshua trees twisted into strange alien shapes. The convoy stretched out behind her for miles, a river of chrome and steel flowing through the wasteland. And then they stopped at a place Harper had never been before. It was a small cemetery and on the edge of the Mojave, surrounded by chain link and tumbleweeds. Tommy led the way through the gate, and the bikers followed, forming a silent procession. They stopped at 2 graves side by side. Bill Holden, April 12, 2006. Beloved father, brother, and friend. Michael Bennett, September 11, 2019. Ironclad heart, iron hands. Harper knelt beside her father's grave, her vision blurring with tears. She reached out and placed her hand on the cold marble headstone. I did it, Dad, she whispered. I found the truth. I fixed the bike. I finished what you started. I kept it running. Tommy knelt beside her and placed snake's cut torn into ribbons on Bill Holden's grave. This is over, Bill. You can rest now. Your killer is dead. Michael avenged you, and his daughter made sure everyone knows the truth. The bikers stood in silence for a long time. Then one by one they started their engines and rode away, leaving Harper and Tommy alone with the dead. We should go, Tommy said gently. We have more to discuss. They rode back to the clubhouse in silence. The garage where Harper had rebuilt the engine was empty now, the tools cleaned and organized. Tommy led her to his office, a small room with a desk, a filing cabinet, and walls covered in photographs of past runs and fallen members. Tommy sat down behind the desk and gestured for Harper to take the chair across from him. Listen, he said, I know this has been a hell of a few days for you, finding out your father was murdered, helping expose a traitor, rebuilding that bike. It is a lot for anyone. Harper nodded but said nothing. Frank Gable is retiring at the end of the year, Tommy continued. His garage is for sale, 6 bays, full diagnostic equipment, alignment rack, frame machine, everything you need to run a serious operation. I cannot afford that, Harper said quietly. I can barely afford rent on the place I have now. Tommy smiled. I bought it this morning, paid cash, and I am giving it to you. Harper stared at him. What? Consider it payment for the work you did on Bill's bike, Tommy said. Consider it an investment in the future. Consider it whatever you want. The point is that garage is yours, free and clear, no mortgage, no rent, just yours. Mr. Henderson, I cannot accept that. It is too much. I cannot. Yes, you can, Tommy interrupted. Your father built bikes for this club for years. He took care of us, and then he spent 13 years trying to bring justice for my father. He died for that. The least I can do is make sure his daughter has a chance to build the life he wanted for her. Harper felt tears streaming down her face. She did not even try to stop them. There is more, Tommy said. The club is going to send work your way, regular maintenance, custom builds, engine work. You are going to be our official mechanic. That means steady income. That means you will never have to worry about money again. Harper could not speak. She just sat there crying, overwhelmed by the sudden shift in her fortunes. Tommy stood up and walked around the desk. He put his hand on her shoulder. Your father was family, Harper. That makes you family. We take care of our own. Always have. Always will. He handed her an envelope. Inside was a set of keys and a deed to Gable's garage. Also a check for $25,000. That is back pay for your father's work over the years, Tommy said. Use it to stock the garage, buy tools, hire help if you need it, whatever you need to get started. Harper looked at the check, at the deed, at the keys. Her hands were shaking. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much. Tommy smiled. No, thank you. You gave my father justice. You gave me the truth. That is worth more than any amount of money. 6 months later, Harper Bennett stood in the newly renovated garage now called Ironclad Customs Reborn. The sign above the door was hand-painted, the letters bold and clean. Her father's original logo, recreated from old photographs, gleamed in the desert sun. Inside, all 6 bays were full. A 2020 Road King getting a Stage 2 upgrade, a 1958 Panhead being restored from the frame up, a custom bobber build for a collector in Los Angeles, a Softail with transmission problems, a Dyna with electrical gremlins, a Sportster that needed a complete engine rebuild. Harper had hired 2 mechanics. Tyler, a kid fresh out of tech school with more enthusiasm than experience, but a willingness to learn. And Marcus, a 50-year-old veteran who had worked at dealerships for decades and knew every trick in the book. They were both good, both reliable, both respectful. She had also hired her mother as the shop manager. Sarah Bennett ran the front office, handled the book scheduled appointments, and made sure Harper actually ate lunch instead of working straight through the day. Sarah had quit the diner. No more double shifts, no more sore feet and rude customers. She was happy. For the first time in years, she was genuinely happy. Business was good, better than good. The Hells Angels sent work her way constantly. And word had spread, Ironclad Customs was becoming known as the place to go if you wanted your bike built right. Harper had a waiting list 3 months long for custom builds. She had paid off all the medical bills, all the back rent, all the debt that had been crushing her family for years. She had bought her mother a new car. She had bought herself a new truck. She had put money in savings for the first time in her life. But the best part, the part that made her smile every single day, was the work itself, building bikes, fixing engines, taking something broken and making it whole again. It was what her father had taught her. It was what she was meant to do. Every night before she locked up, Harper walked over to the back wall where her father's photograph hung in a simple wooden frame. Michael Bennett standing beside Bill Holden and Tommy Henderson, grinning like a man who knew exactly how lucky he was. "I kept my promise," Dad, Harper whispered, as she did every night. "I kept it running." She turned off the lights and walked out into the cool desert night. The FXR was parked outside, gleaming under the streetlights. Tommy had given it to her after the memorial run. "It is yours now," he had said. "You brought it back to life. It belongs to you." Harper straddled the bike, fired up the engine, and rode home. The sound of iron and thunder followed her into the darkness, a reminder of everything she had lost and everything she had gained. The bike never broke down, not once. Harper maintained it religiously, changing the oil every 1,000 miles, adjusting the valves, keeping everything perfect. It ran like a dream. It ran like her father had built it. It ran like a promise kept. Because Harper Bennett, daughter of Michael Bennett, had learned the most important lesson her father ever taught her. Machines do not lie, men do. But if you listen close enough, if you work hard enough, if you refuse to give up, the truth will always come out. Justice may be slow. Justice may be painful. Justice may cost everything you have. But in the end, the iron does not forget. The iron does not forgive. And the iron always tells the truth. Harper lived the rest of her life building motorcycles in the garage her father would have been proud of. She never married, never had kids, but she had family. The Hells Angels became her brothers. The garage became her home. And every bike she built carried a piece of her father's legacy forward. Years later, when people asked her about the legacy patch on her jacket, she would smile and tell them about a man named Michael Bennett who had spent 13 years chasing the truth. About a bike that had been dead for 20 years before being brought back to life. About justice delayed but never denied. And sometimes late at night when the garage was quiet and the desert wind howled, outside Harper would walk over to that 1986 FXR and run her hand over the engine case. She would close her eyes and listen to the silence. And in that silence, she would hear her father's voice. "Listen, baby girl, the iron is talking. It is telling you everything you need to know. You just have to be brave enough to hear it." Harper Bennett heard it. She heard it every single day for the rest of her life. And she never stopped listening.